Of all the people on the Democratic Party ballot for North Carolina's U.S. House District 11, Jamie Ager's candidacy seems the most inevitable. Every ring of the Ager family tree, going back to the early 20th century, has someone holding elected office at the state or federal level. Jamie's older brother, Eric, is in the state house right now, but like all the Ager men before him, Jamie Ager is a farmer first. Hickory Nut Gap Farm, co-founded by Ager and his wife Amy, is an agricultural juggernaut. The regenerative, sustainable farming practices there have shaped a lot of the platform Ager is campaigning on.
I remember multiple sleepless nights where I would stay awake reading some leadership book and then try to apply these lessons. And I think this is true of a lot of things in politics, where it's one thing to read a book and understand what it is. It's another thing to actually persuade people that work for you how to communicate better or lead better or grow.
I'm Matt Peiken. Today on this special episode of Wake Up Asheville, Jamie Ager talks about growing up on his family's Fairview farm, the Ager political legacy, and how his Democratic Party credentials were shaped over 4 generations. We get into healthcare reform, immigration policy, environmental conservation, and the contrasts he sees with Western North Carolina's current Congressman, Republican Chuck Edwards. I began our conversation by asking his views on how farming and politics intersect.
That's a good question. I would say, as a child of someone who was in politics, my grandfather, you're surrounded by all the issues that come up. So it ends up being a lot of dinner, kitchen table discussions about various topics over the years. It also gives you some level of visibility into how hard it can be. The politics has a lot of meanness. And so as a child, that wasn't always easy to deal with. But in hindsight, haters are going to hate, and you're going to have to go through this in life. And learning how to go through that has been a good experience. And then from the farming standpoint, my great-grandparents moved to Western North Carolina in 1916, and my great-grandfather was a minister. And his life's work was essentially, in 1916, Western North Carolina, still in the sort of post-Civil War economic
deep
doldrums.
South.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of poverty here in Western North Carolina. And as a minister, he would go around and preach in all the churches all over Western North Carolina and promote a co-op, a farming co-op that he started and ran for pretty much his entire life, called the Farmers Federation. And the Farmers Federation was dedicated to bringing in innovation to agriculture, bringing in markets, establishing sort of retail feed and seed operations throughout the region. You can still find a lot of feed and seeds in Franklin or Brevard, or a lot of those roots were the Farmers Federation. And they had picnics every summer all over the mountains. And every summer they would have a picnic in every county. And so I would say agricultural leadership has always been part of my family legacy. And I think politics flows from that, right? When you take a leadership role in the community, you end up thinking like a leader. And when you think like a leader, you recognize that politics matters in that context.
Have your family members who have served in politics, have they always been Democrats or liberals or progressives? How would you describe the politics? Because right now it's a binary, Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
But there's all kinds of different Democrats. There's different Republicans. How would you describe the legacy of your family's politics?
I would say it's mountain Democrats might be the best word to describe
How would you?
it.
What are the traits? What are the
Here's
traits
what
of
I
a
would
mountain
say
Democrat?
to that answer is that, and this is consistent with this campaign, is really running a campaign that's focused on this region as its primary focus. Less worried about the labels of all those things and more worried about Western North Carolina as a unique and independent place. And this campaign is going to be about representing all of Western North Carolina and the issues that face Western North Carolina. And so less focused on all that kind of national party labels and more focused on helping working people make a living, make sure their economics are good, recovering from Hurricane Helene, those type issues that are less worried about these national issues.
We'll talk about your platform specifics in a little bit, but I do want to drill down a little bit into how you frame your politics. It's one thing to run under the banner of Democrat. You said your family would talk about the issues around the table.
Sure.
And I imagine as a teenager and just learning about U.S. history and then hearing your family talk about the issues, that must have baked into you certain value systems about whether it's civil rights, you name it. What are some of the baked in issues that you think have led to you writing the platform that you wrote? So
Yeah, that's a good question, sort of the history of it.
Yeah.
And my great-grandfather was a teetotaler in the 30s and then conservative. My grandfather, and I might mess this up, but I'm pretty sure it's right. My grandfather was a converted Democratic Party with JFK in 1960 and a big advocate for the civil rights movement in that whole time period. And I think that kind of inspired him to really lock in as a Democrat. And then I think as Democrats, really thinking about the party working people as the core focus of what good leadership is and how to build an economy that lifts all boats and not just the wealthy. And to me, that sort of defines the family legacy.
2 years ago, Caleb Rudow was running for this seat. He was the only candidate back then for the Democrat. There was no primary. Right now, there's at least 4 candidates, maybe 5, for the Democratic primary. And I'm wondering, why didn't you run 2 years ago? Your brother is in the state house. I'm just curious, what was going on in your world for now for you to get into politics that maybe 2 years ago you didn't consider it?
Yeah, I've never really considered myself going into politics, to be honest. For the last 25 years, I grew up in Fairview. I went to Ray C. Reynolds High School, went to Warren Wilson College just up the road. And I say my wife and I came back to the farm because I really was inspired by the farm mostly and became focused on that and really building the farm and turning it into a little farming operation.
It's a juggernaut.
And a
Hickory Nut
wholesale
Gap.
meat company, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I feel like in that way, I was really focused on the business and really helping that business grow and thrive. And my history of 25 years of kind of entrepreneurship and ultimately organizing a company and building a company takes a lot of leadership. And so I feel like that leadership journey for me is something I've learned the hard way, is learned by messing up and screwing up and not leading people well and recognizing that creates not good outcomes, for the relationship, but also for the organization. And so really learning how to be a better leader was a focus of mine. And I'd say it's been a real journey, but the last 2 years at Hickory Nut Gap I've seen some of that leadership manifest into a great team operating the business day to day. I've always been adjacent to politics. My brother is in the North Carolina House. My father was in the North Carolina House. So I've always paid attention to all this stuff closely, but never considered myself as someone who was going to focus on that.
Were you encouraged by others in your family or others close to you to run now?
I would say I was encouraged in the context that service has always been a part of our family legacy, and serving organizations larger than yourself is part of that legacy. And ultimately, that's where I landed at Hickory Nut Gap as a servant leader, and servant leadership as in empowering people to grow, casting a good vision, creating clarity about where we're going. And to me, that servant leadership role has created space for me to be able to step away from the business day to day and really think about other things. And so this opportunity came about. My brother Eric is somebody I look up to as a big brother, number one, but also as a leader. He's a naval officer and someone who's been more trained formally in leadership. And he inspires me to think about service and service to country in the context of the military for him, but in this context, serving something larger than just the farm and the organization. And as I saw, I have a lot of roots in Asheville. I grew up here. I've lived here my whole life in Western North Carolina, out in Fairview. I know a lot of folks. I've been involved with Farm Bureau, a lot of farming and ag organizations. So I know a lot of folks throughout the region in the rural communities. And as I looked at the opportunity to affect change, to be influential, and to help our country, I'm a patriot. I care about our country. And in that context, I could see myself winning. And if that's true, then it's a privilege to get a chance to jump in and go for it.
You mentioned a couple minutes ago learning from mistakes.
Yes.
And I'm curious, that's interesting to me because from the outside, and obviously in any business, certainly a large thriving business like Hickory Nut Gap, that we don't see things on the outside that are happening on the inside. What kinds of things in the larger macro, not granular level, but what kinds of lessons did you learn about leadership in the past couple of years through your work at Hickory Nut Gap that you think, oh, wow, I'm prepared to be a better leader now than I would have been 2 years ago. And this can translate to serving my region as a congressperson now. What kinds of lessons did you learn?
That's a great question. And I think that as an organization evolves, right? Like many founders that don't end up being good CEOs of the larger organization, because founders generally have entrepreneurship, creativity, a lot of can-do-yourself attitude, because that's how you start a business, right? You got to go do it all yourself. And you really put the whole thing on your shoulders and you roll. As organizations grow, that ability to carry the entire organization as it grows becomes overwhelming. And then you end up becoming burned out. And you see this pattern a lot in entrepreneurial organizations and in businesses. And so as we've grown, I would say that habit of wanting to do everything myself and do all the work myself and really trying to control all the pieces of it, but then have enough people that can actually do the work. And then when you actually control everybody that works for you, it doesn't empower them to grow and become terrific. And then there's always a lot of economic pressure on business, right? Like, how do you offer good benefits? How do you roll out vacation schedules for your employees? All those kind of like administrative acts that do take a ton of thought, and they take a ton of work, and they take a ton of communication. So I think what I've learned from the business side is that, and I'm a reader, I love to read books. I've read all these Patrick Lencioni books, and I realized we were growing too fast, and I was like, I am not able to run this business. And that was terrifying to me. And so I remember multiple sleepless nights where I would stay awake reading some leadership book and then try to apply these lessons. And it's one thing, and I think this is true of a lot of things in politics, where it's one thing to read a book and understand what it is. It's another thing to actually persuade people that work for you how to communicate better or lead better or grow into their roles in different ways. And it's always an imperfect role, but the ability to affect change requires that type of leadership. To me, the past several years have been me leaning into hard conversations with teammates, building a team. What does building a team of people actually mean? What is trust? How do you create healthy communications? I think as I look back, I wish somebody had taught me all this stuff. But of course, learning it the hard way is the best way.
It's the only way
it's
sometimes.
baked into your brain.
Right.
And in that way, I'm grateful for that. But the hard things make you better and stronger long term.
Yeah.
And that was good for me. And I think in politics, it's helpful because I'm humble about execution. Having a big idea about some big program, and I feel like government does this, where it's let's build some new program to help whatever, right? There's a million things, but then the execution of that activity is hard. And so to me, that's an opportunity for leadership to thrive. And one other thing that I think is true is that I think that leadership requires being present for people. And even if you don't have a ton of time, when you're with somebody, lock in for a minute and really be available for listening and stuff like that. And I feel like the past couple of years after Hurricane Helene, we had a lack of leadership from our U.S. Congressman, Chuck Edwards, in this region. And so I think I can be helpful. Like, you got to get out into the community, talk to people, listen, be available.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You alluded to just a few moments ago. You said one of the reasons you got into this campaign was you thought you could win. There was the feeling around you and others that you could win.
Yeah.
And this is something that a Democrat hasn't had a victory in this region for quite a while. Why do you think you can win now?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think that my biography is uniquely fitted to this region. As an entrepreneur, my wife and I, Amy, we built Hickory Nut Gap over the past 25 years and really built a business that's baked in with deep values. Hickory Nut Gap, our mission is to build community through agriculture. And what we mean by that is we want to build a company. Nowadays, there's conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, where you really try to have everybody along the supply chain win. I think one of the bad habits of business in this world is that businesses win whenever they externalize costs onto the environment, externalize costs with poor treatment of their employees, et cetera. Like, my sort of attitude about this is let's not do that. Let's be good for the land, let's be good for animals, and let's be good for people, our employees, our customers, and everybody that we work with, all of our suppliers. And so to me, those values translate to politics and gives us a chance to really lean into values in the context of politics.
Do you think you're reaching people in your campaign now that previous candidates, Democratic candidates, whether their policies were spot on, but do you think that the things you're talking about allow you to reach a public in a way that previous Democratic candidates were not able to?
Yeah, I have been involved in business organizations for the past 25 years and really didn't have a ton of relationships with folks based on our political ideology. It was based on doing business together. And
yeah, if anything, I imagine you probably shy away from political
Sure.
conversations when you're doing business.
Yeah, and in some ways, like I've always been a very sort of transparent human in our business transactions, and I think that my wife criticizes me as you're too much of a pushover or whatever. You're too transparent. And I've always had this attitude of like, we are who we are, we believe what we believe, we do what we do. And to me, I guess it's a risky business strategy, but it works. And I think earning people's trust has been good. And I know so many people in the business community in Asheville that aren't typical Democrats in that sort of context, but they're reasonable. They're not highly ideological. They're problem solvers. And to me, I relate to that side of the opportunity for this campaign is to be somebody that likes to look at problems not through an ideological lens, but through a practical lens. And how do we problem solve this? There's good ideas on both sides of the aisle sometimes. Let's listen and learn. And to me, there's so many bad habits of politics where people just want to pound on the table and scream at the other side. And that's just never been my style. It would be ineffective in business, and I just don't know how effective it is in politics to get in that habit. And I see our country, when you ask Democrats what they want, when you ask Republicans what they want, it's not super different. When you ask Democrats what Republicans want, and when you ask Republicans what Democrats want, we're way, way far apart. And so to me, most people want a good community to live in, a safe community to live in, good paying jobs, a good middle class is good for our economy, is good for business. These are sort of basic nuts and bolts, blocking and tackling parts of running this country. And to me, I get really frustrated whenever everything becomes so partisan so quickly.
This is kind of a bonus week for Wake Up Asheville, but if you're tuning in for the first time to hear from our congressional candidates, you should make it a point to subscribe, because every weekday morning I produce the most comprehensive local newscast in Asheville. I scour the headlines and top stories from the Citizen Times, BPR, The Watchdog, Mountain Express, WLOS, and more, and then boil them all down into a newscast that runs under 4 minutes. Wake Up Asheville keeps you in the know when you're on the go. If you haven't already, subscribe for free right here on your podcasting app. You mentioned a couple moments ago you were starting to be critical of the way Chuck Edwards has served in office. Can you be more specific about the things you think he should have been doing, whether post-Helene or through the run of his congressional tenure, that he hasn't done, or things that he should be representing that he isn't representing? What hasn't happened, or what has happened on his watch that shouldn't have happened?
Yeah, I would say September 27th, 2024, Western North Carolina took a hit in the biggest sense ever, right? Like, we lost so much, most importantly, friends and neighbors throughout our communities. And it devastated our region in an emotional way, but also financially. And I think the total sort of estimated cost from a dollar and cent standpoint, not even talking about the community's emotional stability, is close to $60 billion. And so many small businesses throughout the region are struggling, and businesses down all over Western North Carolina. And it happened on September 27th at Hickory Nut Gap. Our biggest months are October, November, December, with the agritourism activities, all that kind of stuff. And so many businesses are similar to us all over the region. And that economic hit was devastating for so many businesses.
But wouldn't that have happened regardless of who is in Congress?
Okay, so the role of someone in the United States House of Representatives and leadership broadly is to be out and about in the community, talking to folks, learning, being very available for folks. And to me, that was a failure of leadership by Chuck Edwards, in that he didn't come out into the community very much. Nobody ever saw him. He was out in Swannanoa, but we never saw him after that. He was just not available. And to me, we're still like maybe 10 to 15% of the money that was supposed to have gotten here after Helene that we still haven't gotten. And so many communities and so many folks are still waiting for money. And if there is a role for someone in the U.S. House of Representatives, and you have all the seats of government, right, executive branch, both the houses of Congress, your job is to go beat down doors and get the money where it needs to go to make it happen.
And you would think, look, it's Republican-led top to bottom right now. There shouldn't have been an issue. He should have had those doors open for political reasons as much as for human and economic reasons. That hasn't happened. Do you lay that blame on Chuck Edwards?
Right, yeah. There's a lot of rules and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and our government has a lot of challenges and red tape and blah, blah, blah. But the guy who can help cut through all that is the United States House of Representatives. And to me, that hasn't happened. And let's wonder why.
Barring Helene, what are some other criticisms or at least failures that you've seen of that office that you think you would just do things differently?
I think that on the question about the high cost of living and affordability in this region is becoming more and more increasingly overwhelming for so many families. A starter home in Jackson County, to afford a starter home in Jackson County, you have to be making something like $150,000 a year to be able to do that. And that's just so out of the ability for so many people to be able to do that. And healthcare has been an issue that is only gotten worse under Chuck Edwards' leadership in the United States House of Representatives. Yesterday, he voted against extending the subsidies for health care, which is causing everybody's premiums to skyrocket 20-30% year over year or more, right? I have so many examples of these healthcare premiums jumping through the roof. And not that we love these healthcare premiums, they're a little bit of a boondoggle to insurance companies, but in the short term, we sure as heck need to subsidize this stuff so that everyday folks aren't getting hammered, and then you don't have health insurance, and then you don't get primary care, and then you end up in the emergency room. So the whole thing just ends up being this negative cycle that we can't get out of. And healthcare is an issue that so many families struggle with all over this country and Western North Carolina. And they passed the big billionaire bill that happened back in the summer, last summer.
Big, beautiful billionaire bill.
The beautiful bill for billionaires.
Yeah.
And that is destroying some Medicaid infrastructure, so much Medicare, and also threatening our rural hospitals in this region here in Western North Carolina. And rural hospitals are really, once they're gone, you really run the risk of losing them. So to me, we need a comprehensive health care reform. And to me, Chuck Edwards and the Republicans have failed at delivering that with both majorities in Congress.
Yeah, so what would you do? I know affordable health care is part of the spine of your platform. What are some things you want to see happen? What are your feelings about Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act? And what would you do for reform that would uphold the principles that you're talking about?
This is a big topic, right? And to be able to actually come up with the entire proposal is going to be tricky. But I think big picture wise, directionally, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act got more people with health insurance, not less, which is directionally the right direction to go in. Everybody in this country deserves access to health care that's reasonable and reliable. And currently, like 18% of our GDP goes to health care, compared to some other countries in the world where it's 10 to 11%, and they have everybody covered and we don't. And so to me, creating a healthcare system that's transparent with costs so people know exactly how much it costs. Right now, if you go to the doctor and you ask for an actual bill, it looks like hieroglyphics. And so it's ludicrous in that way. Prescription drugs, keeping those affordable and available, expanding benefits for folks on Medicare to include more dental, stuff like that. Just nuts and bolts stuff that are little things that you could get past. But then big picture, we need more folks getting primary care every day and having a relationship with their doctor that they know and trust, and they can communicate with their doctor if something comes up. And so to me, we know what winning looks like if we have more people covered, people can afford it, people trust their doctor, people can get available to their doctor, and they can live their lives without worry that some healthcare bill is it's the number one cause of bankruptcy in this country.
Yeah, you also put on your platform that immigration reform is one of the things. What do you want to see in terms of reformed immigration policy?
I'm in agriculture, so immigration is a big issue in agriculture. As I talk to my farmer friends all over the state, immigration is a big issue that we need to get solved. And I'm an advocate for immigration reform that creates an organized way for people to be able to come to this country in a way that's legal, that everybody's clear on what legal is. And an open border doesn't really work because it just creates chaos. And so to me, we need an immigration reform system that allows people to be able to come to America with an organized way, whether this is agricultural stuff, whether this is temporary visas, whether this is work visas, however we need to come together with that. To me, that system needs to be rethought out and rebuilt because it's broken.
One of the dividing marks when it comes to immigration, I guess I want to get where you land on this, but do we want to create legal pathways for them to be here versus shutting the door on people and limiting immigration?
Immigrants built this country. We're all immigrants. And A study of history and economics will show you that immigration has benefited this country in so many different ways. It needs to be organized. Just having the open border and coming in chaotically doesn't work.
I don't think anybody was advocating an open border.
But to me, having the ability to bring people in that can contribute, that can be part of our communities, and people that have been here for 20 years and are part of our communities that still don't have legal status, finding some way for pathway to citizenship for those folks.
You also talk about environmental regulations and defending environment and public lands. What are specific elements that you want to champion?
Western North Carolina is super dependent on our natural resources, national forests, national parks, Smokies. As a farmer, farmers are the first environmentalists. And to me, regenerative agriculture is absolutely something that we promote out at Hickory Nut Gap. And our agricultural policies could be pointing towards entrepreneurship, towards creating environmentally friendly production systems, items like cover cropping, things like that. NRCS is doing some of that stuff with some of the climate smart stuff in previous administrations and this administration too. And then also this whole idea of selling public lands that came up as part of that big, beautiful billionaire bill. I like the way we say that. That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
The big, beautiful for billionaires bill
Yeah.
did have a lot of discussion from folks in the West and the Republican Party pushing for selling public lands. And to me, that's just ridiculous and unacceptable for right here in Western North Carolina.
Are there other elements of your platform we haven't talked about that you think are particularly germane now, or that aren't being talked about enough, that you think really need to be part of the national conversation?
Our trust in government is very low. It polls at the lowest it's ever polled. And that's unacceptable in the context that we are a democracy with a grand history and we're America, right? America can do great things. And to believe that's true and to feel hopeful requires us to have a faith that our government can do big things. And right now, our government is failing us on so many levels. We can't pass healthcare. We can't pass immigration reform. These are nuts and bolts things. This is a garbage pickup in your communities. It's got to run or things start to get really bad. And we're seeing this happen. And I think a lot of this activity is due to the partisanship that's created up there. And to me, some specific things we can do is to ban stock trading by members of Congress so that they're not just up there for their own benefit to make a bunch of money and get visibility into where markets are going. We've got campaign finance reform. It costs way too much money for us to be out here running for office, and Citizens United, all these different things, dark money in campaigns, all that stuff just becomes unhelpful in the context that a representative should be out in the community talking to people. And if you spend all your time raising money, then you end up being beholden to the people you raise money from, and then you end up with the wrong incentives to do good things for the people that you represent.
How do you feel about judicial reform? I'm curious about lifetime appointments on the Supreme Court. Have you given much thought about where you would stand on either expanding the Supreme Court or having term limits?
I don't have any specific policy like advocacy moments, but I do think that in general, judicial reform is always worth looking at. To me, all these questions about judicial reform kind of stem from our understanding that there's some real incorrect incentives for folks in power. The government is in so many ways riddled with misincentives, and so fixing that.
Is there anything we haven't talked about around your campaign or what you're seeing out in the region now that you are a candidate? Are there things that have cropped up from the public to your attention?
Helene is something I continue to hear about. I think this question of affordability and mistrust in government. As a father, I have 3 boys. My oldest son, Cyrus, is 21. My middle son, Nolan, is 18. And my youngest son, Levi, is 16.
Are they working the farm?
And, they're working the farm. Yeah, Levi was up this morning early, going to an FFA. He's part of the Future Farmers of America there at A.C. Reynolds High School. And we're trying to find a path for young people to feel hopeful. And I think young people generally feel cynical about it.
It's a hard time for young people.
It's a hard time to feel like they can get ahead and make this work. And that just devastates me when you see people who work hard, who play by the rules, who do the things you're supposed to do, and they still can't afford to own a home.
Yeah.
They still can't afford to build a house. They still have childcare so expensive in Western North Carolina. And to me, these are nuts and bolts things that we should be able to solve because we're a great country, and that's frustrating.
How are you going to thread your time between the farm and Congress should you win?
What to do in the scenario that I'm in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
and I get a phone call that the cows are out.
Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do? How are you going to step away from the farm in a sense and hand it over to Cyrus and company and your wife while you wage war on Capitol Hill?
Well, now that we know that we're going to go win this thing, we're starting to give this a whole lot more thought. I come from a big family. We've got great employees at Hickory Nut Gap who are doing the day-to-day stuff every day pretty much right now. We want to have a massive sense of urgency to get this solved, but certainly this is on my mind to think about as we navigate this. And my wife keeps reminding me that we need to talk about this more. And I said, okay, sounds good. At Hickory Nut Gap, we use a business model called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And we develop annual goals, and we have quarterly projects that kind of ladder into our annual goals. And so one of my Q1 goals is to really lock in a good plan.
I want to thank Jamie Ager for today's conversation. This episode is one of 4 rolling out this week, featuring candidates on the Democratic Party primary ballot to represent Western North Carolina in Congress. Please tune in and share these episodes with people you believe need to be better informed and inspired going into the March 3rd primary. If you haven't already, also subscribe to Wake Up Asheville. We'll be back in February with morning newscasts every weekday with headlines from across the local news media landscape. Until then, I'm Matt Peiken. Thanks so much for waking up with Wake Up Asheville.